The music stopped as soon as I heard it. It stopped as if someone had pulled the cord from the wall. It didn't fade or lessen. Instantly, 100 heads turned. The bride stopped in her tracks. She let go of the groom's hand. With their tiny sneakers skidding on the shiny church floor, even the kids running in the back row became motionless. Then, like a low drum, the officer's steady ceremonial voice was increased just enough to reverberate throughout the chapel. "Please stand up, everyone. There is the Admiral." The whole wedding held its breath for a moment. Dresses rustled, chairs scraped, and rows of visitors, co-workers, neighbors, distant cousins, and people who hadn't talked to me in 20 years stood with the rigid, reflexive instinct of someone who had unexpectedly encountered something. In a whisper, "Admiral." Another person remarked, "No, it can't be her." The sound that will stick with me for the rest of my life was then heard. My dad choked on his booze. He didn't cough once or twice. He wheezed, sputtered, and almost dropped the glass eyes, which bulged like a man's eyes when the world he created in his mind abruptly falls apart. Someone would have witnessed the most bizarre event if they had stopped the day and recorded that moment of incredulity, embarrassment, pride, and reckoning. I wasn't upset. No more. However, allow me to explain how we arrived. I had no intention of going to the wedding. I had dedicated 30 years of my life to serving the Navy by traveling across oceans, through the wind of the desert, and into briefing rooms where decisions were made with ink thick enough to change the course of history. Holidays, reunions, and weddings. Those items belonged to civilians, families who understood how to maintain their wholeness, and people who led softer lives. Mine didn't. Nevertheless, something inside of me softened when my brother sent the invitation, which was handwritten and sandwiched between 2 pages of plain card paper. It was sufficient that he wrote, "It would mean something if you came. Not everything, not the world, just something." I arrived early, not early enough to be seen arriving with the major attendees, but early enough to be forgotten in the mix. I smoothed the folds of my white dress uniform, tucked my cover under my arm, and parked at the far end of the gravel lot behind the oak trees. An old habit: straighten the metal, check the handcuffs, and adjust the collar. It is impossible to spend decades in uniform without developing the ability to read every wrinkle as a map of your former self. Crunching over gravel, I got out of my rental car boots. Thick and muggy, the Carolina heat clung to the back of my neck. Cicadas buzzed as if they were debating the sun. The church bell made a slow, gentle sound as it chimed once and twice. I heard the voice at that point. "This family is ashamed of you." The 2 groomsmen smoking by the doors turned their heads when they heard the 5 words, which were as sharp as a sword. I knew it was my father without having to look. Since his time in the service, he had maintained the same position. Stiff and unyielding, a guy whose value was determined by tradition and obedience. However, his gaze slid down my outfit with the same old contempt that I had grown up inhaling like secondhand smoke. A group of family members grinned around him. "Did she really wear that?" someone muttered. Someone else remarked, "God, she's still trying too hard." When my father didn't stop them, they began to laugh more loudly. I remained motionless. Didn't recoil. Didn't blink. The sand beneath my boots trembled as I faced mortar fire. I have spoken to rooms full of brass who were waiting for me to make a mistake so they could claim that a woman shouldn't be in charge. This was insignificant. Even still, I felt a familiar heavy realization that certain wounds don't bleed tighten inside of me instead of causing pain. They reverberate. My father usually gave me the same look, as if he hoped I had changed into a smaller, more submissive version of myself. "Take off that uniform," he whispered. "You're embarrassing yourself." I caught his steady, unwavering gaze. "Good afternoon, Dad." I only said that. The laughter behind him resumed like cheap perfume as he scowled and looked away. I ignored their ruckus and moved past them in the direction of the church doors. "Mommy, is she a soldier?" A young child, perhaps 6 years old, muttered as she pulled at her mother's dress as I arrived at the stairs. Her mother gave a timid smile. "Better than that, my love. Her color is navy." That afternoon, I allowed myself to breathe for the first time. The chapel's interior was illuminated by warm candles, sunlight streaming through large stained glass windows, white ribbons hanging from the pews, and the aroma of polished wood and lees. Promised myself that I would witness the ceremony in silence in the back, congratulate my brother, and then sneak out before the reception. Just presence, no hassle, no scenes. That was the strategy. However, life has a tendency to divide in two when you least expect it, between the time you walk into a room as one person and the time the world discovers you are someone else. Because the musicians froze at the sound of my footsteps on the old hardwood floor as soon as I crossed the threshold. The violinist's bow was suspended in midair. The fingers of the pianist lingered over the keys. The muttering ceased. Slowly, slowly. Near the front, someone turned. Then one more. Faces changed from irritation to perplexity to disbelief. Then the official, a man in his late 60s whose voice had been shaped by years of funerals, baptisms, and the steady beat of faith, raised his eyes and spoke the words that shook the entire room. "Please stand up, everyone. There is the Admiral." The chapel table was filled with the sound of bodies scraping against wooden pews, clothing smoothing. It was instinctive rather than planned or trained. And I heard it again through the open doorway behind me, why Dad choked on his booze. I remained still for a long time. With the warm Carolina sunlight at my back and the silence of 100 astonished guests in front of me, I stood just beyond the chapel's open doors. The world seemed to stop, not out of fear or even reverence, but rather out of the sheer astonishment of witnessing someone they believed to be familiar suddenly come to light. A lady wearing a 4-star uniform is unfamiliar to the public. Not in a North Carolina little town. Not at a wedding in the family. The whisper echoed through the pews, and I heard it. "Is that her? She is a 4-star Admiral. That is not my God. Examine the ribbons." The bride's big, shaking eyes were fixed on me as she stood motionless at the aisle. It was a mixture of amazement, perplexity, and something more subtle that I wouldn't fully get until long later. The room itself refused to settle as the groom shuffled clumsily in an attempt to regain the moment he had been waiting a lifetime for. Because once the officer declares, "Everyone rise for the Admiral," nothing can go back to normal. I had no idea what to do with my hands at first. I hadn't entered a setting that wasn't based on rank or etiquette for years. I knew exactly where to look when to salute, and when to talk when I was in the Navy. However, in this small chapel, with fake flowers and a neighbor's borrowed aisle runner, this was new territory. Decades of duty had instilled in me the instinct to recognize the room. Decades of family distance had hardened my emotions, telling me to keep moving forward. I went with something in the middle. A slight nod that acknowledges the respect being shown without being overly formal or rigid. That was sufficient. Like a wave retreating after an unexpected tide, people sat back down slowly and uncertainly. However, the energy remained unsettled. Electric and delicate, it hovered, waiting. I snuck into the pew closest to the door, which was the last one on the right. As is common with antique pews, the wooden seat creaked under my weight. With my gloved hands delicately resting on top, I put my white cover in my lap. My shoulders were no longer squared for combat, but I still carried the memory of it as my breathing became more steady and my posture softened. When I raised my gaze once again, I saw that the groom's mother was studying and staring, but not in an unpleasant way. The way people view a relic from a conflict they have only read about in books. Then from behind me, I heard a muffled, frustrated exhale. My dad. Stiff as a fence pillar, he slipped into the pew across the aisle. He had choked on his drink, and his cheeks were still red. A wet smear was left down the front of his jacket after his awkward attempt to remove the stain. He kept looking at me, then away, then back again, as if he wasn't sure whether to give me a reprimand or a salute. Uncertainty was unfamiliar to my father, and it scared him. The official's voice faltered somewhat as he struggled to fit inside the script, but the ceremony went on. The bride's father steadied her by placing a hand on her arm. Her fingers were squeezed by the groom. The rhythm gradually came back. However, something else started in the far back pew. Like a thread coming loose from a tapestry that had held firm for decades, the tugging was silent and unrelenting. Uninvited and inevitable recollections stirred as the vows started. My father initially told me I didn't belong in uniform when I was 10 years old. A chilly wind blew through the stadium during the Army-Navy game. My tiny hands encircled a cup of lukewarm chocolate. I was enthralled with the cadets' accuracy, pride, and unity as they marched across the field. He didn't even look down when I said, "Dad, I want to do that someday." "Not for you. You're a girl," he remarked with a sneer. "Let men handle that." He spoke loudly enough for outsiders to hear. That day, I discovered two things. The uniform was more important to my father than the individual wearing it. Furthermore, he never thought his daughter would be worthy of a salute. The bride and groom exchanged rings back in the chapel. Her voice cracked with delight, while my brothers trembled with emotion. I could feel the weight of previous wounds tugging at the borders of my focus, even though it should have been a simple, lovely moment. I made myself return to the here and now. The bride's father gave me another look, but his eyes were softer this time. His wife raised her eyebrows in silent surprise as he leaned in to whisper something. Individuals further ahead started to turn around one by one in an attempt to catch another glimpse. Curiosity blended with a respect they were still unsure of how to articulate. But I didn't care about any of that. Not right then, not right then. Because my father did not clap when the newlyweds shared a kiss and the guests cheered. His jaw was clenched so tightly that I could feel the tremor in the muscle next to his temple as he sat there with his hands folded securely in his lap. Confusion, rage, shame, and pride. Perhaps everything was intertwined. He was never prepared for this by fatherhood. I stayed sitting until the majority of the congregation moved into the corridor, when the upbeat and cheery recessional music started. That's how I liked it. Fewer stares, less attention. However, someone blocked the aisle when I eventually got up to follow them out. The bride. She was standing in front of me with a bouquet in her hand, shaking a little, and her eyes were full with a feeling I hadn't anticipated. "Ma'am," she said in a steady yet gentle murmur. "Thank you for being here." I gave a blink. "You have the day." I didn't want to cause any trouble. "You didn't disturb anything," she shook her head. You honored it." More than any ambush I had ever encountered, the genuineness in her words disarmed me. Something that I couldn't quite put my finger on began to relax in my chest. Her father, who was tall and graying, came over before I could reply. His strong handshake suggested that he had years of experience in the legal industry or in some other leadership role. However, I wasn't impressed with his handshake. It was the expression in his eyes. Nor amazement, nor terror, but respect, plain and simple. "Admiral," he declared, "it's an honor having you here today." I gave a slow nod. "Thank you, sir." He gave a quiet laugh. "My daughter recently wed your brother, sir. I believe I should refer to you as family rather than sir." I was astonished by the warmth in his voice. Family, a word I hadn't felt welcomed into for a long time. Then my father emerged in the doorway behind him. He remained silent. He remained still. He simply observed the storm building up behind his eyes. As though defending a border that only he could perceive, my father stood there obstructing the entry. He had the ideal military stance, shoulders locked, chin raised back, and straight. However, his eyes were a battlefield. Bewilderment, pride, bitterness, and remorse. He appeared to be a man who was unsure of how to back down as all he had battled to keep hidden suddenly came to light. He was surrounded by awkwardly crowded guests who nodded courteously as they slipped toward the reception hall. A few looked at me sympathetically, not sure what tension they had entered but knowing it was important. My father remained motionless while the bride's father moved aside to make room for him. He remained grounded, staring at me as if attempting to reconcile two contradictory realities. The Admiral for whom the entire chapel had just risen, and the daughter he disparaged at the door. With a gentle smile and a gentle touch on my arm, the groom's mother moved her family aside to make room for us. The only sounds left were the faint buzz of organ pipes and the echo of footsteps. My father finally spoke after a painful period of silence. "You wore that uniform," he said in a low, piercing voice. "On purpose." It wasn't a question. It wasn't even anger. It was accusation laced with something unfamiliar, maybe fear or shame. I kept my tone steady. "It's my dress uniform. I came straight from base. You could have changed." He snapped. "Why should I?" I let the words sit. He blinked, stunned. Because for the majority of my life, I never dared to speak back to him. He ruled our home like a drill instructor, and I was the kid who discovered early on that obedience was safer than honesty. However, time, loss, and deployments in adulthood have the power to rewire a person, and the years have etched steel where hesitancy once resided. Adam's apple bobbed in my father's mouth. "This isn't a parade ground, this is a wedding." "It's both," I muttered. "A day when people are themselves." He winced. Perhaps he picked up on the double meaning. Perhaps he didn't. My brother materialized behind him before he could respond. Eyes flitting between us like a referee who didn't want the contest to begin, tie-loosened cheeks flushed from champagne. Dad, he uttered cautiously. I'm not done, my father snarled. Let's go to the reception. People are looking for you. My brother, however, shook his head. Let it breathe. Stunned once more, my father gazed at him. 2 defiant children in one day was more than he ever anticipated. He retreated in a more delicate manner rather than one of capitulation. Uncertainty. Without saying anything else, he turned and headed for the courtyard. My brother exhaled deeply. Well, he said, that could have gone worse. I smiled a little. Could it? He rubbed the back of his neck and chuckled to himself. I made an effort to dissuade him from speaking. I reasoned that you wouldn't have told him I was coming if he had noticed you and realized you were here. He paused. He located the invitation. I was still unsure of what to say. I arched an eyebrow. He let out a sigh. All right. I didn't tell him since I didn't want a scene and I wasn't sure how he would respond. Like a dropped anchor, the irony of that fell between us. I'm glad you came, he said hastily. I truly am. His voice had both earnestness and the kind of remorse that results from years of taking the simpler route. I didn't hold it against him. People pick up lessons from their parents, and our father was not a kind instructor. I became softer. Today is the day of your wedding. It's something I wouldn't miss. With a relieved smile, he released the tension in his shoulders. Mom would have been thrilled to see this. Something inside of me wrenched at the mention of her. Before school, I had a flashback of Grandma sitting by the window with her cardigan sleeves turned up and stroking my hair. Her smile was gentle, pleasant, and carefree. The reverse of him. Yes, I muttered. She would have. He paused once more, mulling over an idea he didn't want to share, but he eventually said. He told us not to invite you. Claimed that you would attempt to surpass the family. I let out a slow breath, feeling the frigid air in my chest. And you concurred? No, he blurted out. No, I didn't agree, but I also didn't fight him hard enough. It was there. He was always hiding his honesty. Because it was based on the truth, the honesty hurt more. He apologized for listening to him for so long and for allowing him to influence my perception of you. On the final syllable, his voice broke. When someone apologizes for something you stopped anticipating decades ago, it's an odd thing. It reshapes the scar, but it doesn't suddenly heal you. It's all right, I said softly. All of us grew up in the same home. With a look of relief, he nodded. Before either of us could say anything further, a tiny wiry person in a well-pressed suit was approached by an old man using a cane. As soon as he spotted me, his eyes brightened. Admiral Holstead, he said in a somewhat shaky voice. I stood. Yes, Sir. A trembling smile appeared on his lips. I knew it was you. During Operation Kestrel, my kid was under your command. He was saved by you. The world slowed. Kestrel, the ambush, the helicopter rescue, and the day I applied pressure to a wound that ought to have killed someone. I recalled everything. The elderly man told me to shake your hand and express gratitude if he ever saw you again. His voice broke. So thank you. I extended my arm and gently grasped his hand between mine. I whispered, I'm glad he made it home. The man murmured, he named his daughter after you. That was more impactful than any salute I had ever gotten. My brother's eyes widened in shock. The story spread like wildfire through the gathering as others in the vicinity started whispering it. It wasn't boasting. It wasn't a speech. It was simply the truth, spoken calmly and respectfully by an appreciative parent. And in the courtyard entryway, my own father had stopped walking. He listened, locked in place. The elderly man gave me a pat on the arm. Admiral, may God bless you. My brother gave me a fresh look of respect as he left, one that was earned through understanding rather than something taken from the uniform. He said, I didn't know. I said, you weren't supposed to. I don't do any of this for recognition. He gave a slow nod. Perhaps not, but people ought to be aware. I looked at the doorway once again and why Dad had disappeared. My father disappearing into the courtyard didn't surprise me. Retreat was his favorite battlefield tactic. He'd done it my whole life, not physically, but emotionally. Whenever things became complicated, whenever I evolved into someone he couldn't control or foresee, he'd withdraw into quiet so heavy it felt like a punishment. And I had gotten really complicated for him tonight. The event hall of the church served as the venue for the reception. White tablecloths, simple floral centerpieces, a strand of soft lights strung overhead. In an attempt to revive the celebratory atmosphere, a local band tuned instruments in the cornered acquainted. Waves of curious and excited guests filled the room, many of them still whispering about the event. I let folks go by staying close to the rear wall. I didn't want to take the limelight away from my brother and his new wife, and I wasn't prepared for small conversation. They had the night. However, in small villages, word spreads more quickly than the wind through pine trees. People soon started coming in groups of 1 or 2. A few expressed their kind congratulations. Others expressed their gratitude for my service in hushed tones, the kind appreciation that older Americans keep deep within. Few gave me a reverent handshake that felt far greater than I deserved. "My nephew's in the Navy, ma'am," a middle-aged woman remarked, dabbing at her eyes. "Just knowing that someone like you exists makes me proud." I thanked her politely, but I never really managed to let go of the weight that these kinds of events always carried. My father was standing stiffly at a table by himself across the room. He kept his hands off his food. He said nothing to anyone. Rather, he occasionally observed me with a piercing gaze, as if I were a mirror reflecting something he was afraid to confront. I looked away. The bride came over, her still bright bouquet half wilted after the wedding but still carried with the same loving enthusiasm. "Can I steal you for a moment?" she requested quietly, "Admiral," and I nodded. She guided me away from the commotion and curious glances to a more peaceful place. "I hope you don't mind me saying this," she said. I gave a small smile and said, "But I didn't know, not even a little, who you were." She shook her head and said, "I prefer it that way. No, I mean my family has talked about your father for years, how strict he is, how you two barely speak. Nobody ever mentioned that you were someone the Navy stands for." Her expression changed from angry to ashamed. "If you are uncomfortable today, I apologize." I said, "It's your wedding day. It's not your duty to be awkward." She let out a lovely little laugh. "My dad is always talking about you. For the rest of our lives, I believe he wants to invite you to every barbecue." This time, my smile was warmer. "That's how he is." She paused. "Your brother, my husband, wants to make things right. I simply hope that you and your father might one day." Uncertain if she had gone too far, her voice drifted off. I spared her the pain. "I see." She gave me a squeeze on the hand and went back to the throng. After watching her leave, I strayed in the direction of an open door that opened onto the tiny patio behind the hall. Everything was bathed in amber by the evening light. Between the trees, fireflies blinked idly. The aroma of warm earth and pine, reminiscent of summers long gone, filled the air. When I didn't yet realize the cracks in the foundation of our family, things looked easier. I heard footsteps coming from behind me. I didn't turn. My father added, "Your mother liked this time of day." Like stones falling into quiet water, the words fell. I gently turned to face him. Out here, he appeared worn out and older, a man with more regrets than achievements and more years than medals. She sat on the porch once. He kept gazing at the trees and fireflies until she was unable to distinguish between the light and the dark. There was a deep but non-aggressive silence between us. I let it to breathe. He continued, "You didn't tell me about any of it. I wasn't sure you wanted to know." That made him recoil as though the truth had tangible force. "I followed your career," he whispered. "Through the news and friends. People called me when you became me Rear Admiral. Questioned whether I felt proud." He let out a trembling breath. I had no idea how to respond. My jaw clenched. "You didn't, then?" He took a swallow. "No. It was there. Beneath every snub, insult, and icy silence lies a wound. It's inadequacy, not jealousy or hatred. He was afraid he hadn't been the father he believed he ought to be. And he chose to hide rather than grow. I never got it." "Why did you choose the Navy?" he murmured. "You told me I couldn't, and I nearly laughed." He was shocked by it, not because he didn't know it was true, but rather because he had never thought that his restrictions didn't become mine. The evening breeze lifted the hem of my dress blues as I moved closer. I whispered, "Dad, I didn't join to spite you. I joined because I felt that service was important. Since I desired to take the lead. Because the public needed law enforcement officials who paid attention." He bowed his head. "I didn't want you to suffer. I gazed at him. Genuinely gazed, perhaps for the first time, at the frightened, terrified guy inside the stiff soldier. The man who lost his wife too soon. The man who thought that being vulnerable meant being weak. The man who was never taught how to love without giving orders. "You were gone all the time," he whispered. Every time the news reported that a lady was among the casualties overseas, I wondered about it. His voice broke. "I felt like I had let you down." He hadn't anticipated breaking. Startled by his own feeling, his eyes grew wide. "I thought you chose the Navy because you didn't want to be anything like me," he muttered. "For years." "And for years," I said softly, "I thought you ignored my career because you were ashamed of me." We stood facing each other. Two wounded soldiers from the same war, finally lowering our weapons. He looked down at my uniform, then slowly, reverently, like he was seeing it for the first time. When the officiant said, "Admiral," he said, voice shaking, it felt like someone punched me. "Why?" "Because I realized he said that everyone else stood for you except me," I asked. "I don't know how to fix this," he said as a firefly drifted between us, glowing once before vanishing into the dusk. I took a long breath of pine dirt memory and allowed an ancient part of me to settle. I answered, "You start by not running." He gave one slow, hefty nod of humility. "A start." Glasses clinking, the band easing into an ancient Carolina waltz, and the pleasant hum of joyous laughter rolling like gentle waves filled the reception hall. However, the atmosphere remained tense in the little patio behind the hall where my father and I had spoken our first sincere words in decades. It wasn't aggressive or painful, just uneasy, like if the ground had moved beneath us and neither of us had yet regained our equilibrium. With the typical precision of a man who required order to survive, my father cleared his throat and adjusted the sleeve of his suit jacket. "You should go inside," he whispered. "It's the wedding of your brother." I said, "So should you." He remained still. I could tell how deep the fracture was just by looking at that. I murmured softly, "Dad. This doesn't have to be done tonight." He let out a short, irritated breath through his nose, as if he were upset with himself for not knowing how to proceed. After giving a curt nod, he turned and went back into the hallway. However, he did not approach the throng. He avoided the center like a flame that may burn him, walking around it and skirting it. Certain behaviors gradually fade. I kept my distance to give him room. The hall was alive once more inside. Kids spinning close to the dance floor. The bride was laughing so brilliantly, her veil shimmering, while my brother's buddies were sipping beers. When my brother saw me, he jogged across my hot cheeks. He said, "You okay?" I grinned. "I'm fine, really." He nodded and drew me to the head table after hesitating as though he wasn't sure he could accept it. He said, "You're sitting with us." "I don't require it." "Nope," he cut me off. "This cannot be negotiated." When we got there, the bride laughed. "You have a seat reserved for you." A tiny considerate gesture, a white chair with a navy ribbon. Took me a moment to answer. "I'm grateful." The groom's father got up and picked up a glass as we settled in. A tall, broad-shouldered man had a commanding presence that didn't require him to speak up. He gave the microphone a tap. "If only I could get your notice," he continued, "I'd like to welcome everyone and say a few words." The crowd fell silent. The clinking of the plates ceased. He grinned first at his daughter and then at my brother. However, something changed in the room when his eyes strayed to mine. "We celebrate love, family, and unity today," he said. "However, we also pay tribute to those who taught us the significance of these concepts." He looked at the groom's family, the bride's mother, and then purposefully at me. "And sometimes," he added, "we are lucky enough to have among us someone whose service to our country has protected more families than we will ever know." A murmur went through the crowd, and I felt my heart tighten, not out of pride, but because of the unexpected gentleness of the acknowledgement. "I didn't know she'd be here tonight," he said, "but I am honored she is." He raised his glass in my direction, and Admiral Holstead heard a ripple of applause. Some stood, others hesitated, and the groom's father watched me the entire time with warm, grounded sincerity. However, my father was still sat at a table close to the wall across the room. With his eyes concentrated on the vacant area in front of him, he clapped courteously but too slowly and stiffly. The cheers subsided. The band started up again. There were dinners. Like smoke, laughter swirled around the tables. However, something unexpected and novel occurred. A couple of elderly guys with gray hair and worn hands came toward me with deference that was far heavier than their footsteps. One said, I was Navy 73. Seeing you, it means something. Another remarked, Ma'am, my brother served under your command. With moist eyes, a third merely saluted. Every conversation was brief, gentle, and genuine, but they were all like a blow to my father. His jaw tightened every time someone thanked me as he observed from the other side of the room. His gaze shifted from me to them, then back to the metals on my chest. It wasn't envy. It wasn't rage. It was insight. Realizing that the daughter he had written off as a disgrace had developed a life characterized by sacrifice, leadership, and service that extended well beyond the little world he had attempted to keep her in. The father of the bride came up to him. I once caught a glimpse of it. He held out his hand. Reluctantly, my father agreed. They had a brief conversation. The father of the groom pointed at me. My dad murmured something nasty and shook his head. My father stiffened as the groom's father scowled and responded. My father appeared older than his years as a result of whatever it was. Dinner was over. The music grew softer. The first dance started. Under the warm lights, my brother turned gently while hugging his new wife. People cheered, cooed, and raised their phones to take pictures. Unnoticed by the cameras, I observed something unexpected behind them. A man in his late 40s or early 50s approached me with a little limp and a cane. He had a stiff left leg. A little tremor shook his right hand. Admiral, he said. I got up right away. He gave a feeble smile. I apologize for interrupting. I just wanted to say hi. My eyes squinted a little. Are you someone I know? Not directly, he responded, but my squadron was under your supervision in Bahrain. I took a breath. He replied, you saved more lives than anyone acknowledged. I muttered, I didn't do it alone. He gave a nod. Individuals such as yourselves never took credit. It is therefore more important. My chest relaxed once more, and I experienced a sense of near calm for the first time that evening. He gave me a forearm squeeze. Admiral, you continue to carry people even when they are unaware of it. I turned to see my father standing a few feet away after he had departed. His hands were by his sides, his mouth were open, his eyes were moist, but he was not making any noise. Every syllable had been heard by him. Like a man drowning in sentences he had never learnt to pronounce, his mouth opened, closed, and then opened again. He didn't come near though. Silent, shaken, and broken open in a way he was still unable to confront, he strolled back into the darkness. My brother showed up beside me. Dad, where are you? I muttered outside. With a clouded look, he nodded slowly. He said, I don't hate you. He simply has no idea how to love you. Perhaps that was accurate. Perhaps it wasn't. In any case, it explained the years rather than absolving them. I turned to face the open door, where the faint sound of cicadas was wafted by the night wind. I said, when he's ready, I'll talk to him. My brother let out a sigh of relief. Then he grinned. I appreciate you being here. Really? I gave his hand a squeeze. I belong there tonight. Outside the reception hall, the night air felt colder than it had earlier, colder than it should have been for North Carolina's late July. Perhaps it was the wind. Or perhaps it was the kind of chill that occurs when a person is unprepared to deal with changes in the earth underneath them. I walked the route to the tiny courtyard behind the hall, where I had previously chatted with my father. The string lights overhead gave the stone walkway a slight sheen. Over the shrubs, fireflies floated idly. Cicadas and the muffled sounds from within melded into an odd reverberating harmony. I discovered him standing by the wooden railing that provided a view of the shadowy row of pine trees beyond the courtyard's border. His shoulders were bent in the manner of a guy who suddenly feels the full weight of years he has disregarded, not in a dramatic or defeated manner. I just stared at him for a while. When I was younger, I used to examine him in the same manner, attempting to discern the way his hands curled, the angle of his jaw, and the tightness in his spine. I searched for warning indicators back then. I searched for the truth tonight. Silently, I moved onward. He knew I was there even though he didn't look back. He said, I heard what that man said. Beside him, I leaned on the railing. Which one? He let out a quick breath. All of them. All of them. Letting the night breathe around us, we stood in stillness. At last he remarked, I didn't expect any of this. I gave a nod. I know. His eyes glinted in the lights as he turned to face me. swirling emotions that have nowhere to land. He questioned, "When did it happen? When did you become this?" It wasn't offensive. It wasn't commendation. It was confusion. I responded slowly at first, then all at once. He took in the shifting of his jaw. "I knew you were in the Navy," he remarked. "Knew you'd made rank, but a 4-star. He gave a head shake. How could I have overlooked that? I answered softly by not looking. He winced. He argued that even though I didn't express it, I was proud. I steadily met his gaze. "Silence isn't pride, Dad. It seems like forgetting when you are silent." I didn't mean for the words to hit him so hard. He averted his gaze while swallowing back whatever erupted in his throat. He spoke again, lowering his voice, after a little pause. "Remember that Army-Navy game? That's the one where I claimed wearing a uniform wasn't appropriate." I recall. Embarrassed, he rubbed his hands together. "I believed I was keeping you safe." I said, "I'd never amount to anything," raising an eyebrow. "Don't follow the path that ruined me," he said in a broken voice. I was stopped by that. He seldom ever discussed Vietnam. Rarely did he discuss anything that made him human rather than unbreakable. But here it was, finally spoken aloud. The reality that I had long suspected but had never heard expressed. "It didn't ruin you," I whispered. He laughed bitterly. "It ruined everything around me." The admission hung between us like smoke. "You weren't ruined," I muttered. "You were bewildered, furious, and afraid. However, you weren't destroyed." He gave me a shocked look, as if he hadn't anticipated sympathy from the daughter he had spent decades rejecting. "You always looked stronger than me," he whispered. "Even as a child." I said, "That's not how kids should feel." Shame flashed across his face as he nodded. We stood that way for a while, two veterans of different battlefields, each limping in ways not evident to the world. "When the officiant announced you, the whole room stood. I've never seen anything like it," he concluded. "It surprised me too," I acknowledged. He laughed tensely and remarked, "I nearly choked." I observed. His cheeks flushed. "I guess everyone did." I gave a soft shrug. "What matters is not that." "Then why did he ask in a quiet voice that you stayed?" "You didn't leave," I replied plainly. His eyes glossed as he gazed at me. "God, I really wanted to, but I was unable to." "Why not?" His jaw tightened. "Because I wasn't the most respected person in the room for the first time in my life." That admission was vulnerable, honest, and unvarnished. I muttered, "You were never in competition with me." He said, "I didn't know that." "Then no." He gazed down at my hand, which had become tougher and stronger due to a career he had never understood. He said, "You led men through fire. You prevented deaths. People are grateful that you brought their sons home." He lowered his voice. "Not even my own family could stay united." His eyes welled up, but he blinked vigorously to keep the tears from falling. I stepped closer and said, "Dad, I learned discipline from you. I learned grit from you. I learned to stand my ground from you. Indeed, there were moments when you taught me through dread. However, you also taught me how to be responsible." He gave a head shake. "You learned incorrect lessons from me." I said, "You taught me something, and I built on it my way." A long silence. He said, "I don't deserve you." I said, "That's not how families operate." He put his hands over his face and let out a trembling breath. "I believed that I was shielding you from the outside world. As it happens, the world needed you more than I did." I put a soft touch on his shoulder and murmured, "That's not true. However, I couldn't wait for you to visit me indefinitely." With weary but wide eyes, he lowered his hands. "For the first time in my life, I'm truly open." He said, "I see you now." I was more affected by its simplicity than by any speech. I gave a slow nod. "That's the beginning." An elderly soldier regaining his composure, he straightened his spine and cleared his voice. "What happens next?" "We move forward," I said. "Not fast, not perfect, but forward." He gave another nod. The groom's father entered the courtyard and began looking before either of us could say anything more. "They're going to cut the cake, Admiral. Your loved ones want you to be there." He was correct. My family, broken in some places, healing in others, but mine all the same. I turned to face my dad. Join me. He paused. Then he extended his arm slowly and deliberately. A gesture great enough to imply everything, yet small enough to be ignored. I accepted it. Together, we went inside. My father's arm connected with mine as soon as we returned to the reception area. The space moved. There was a subtle collective softening, as if everyone understood something delicate and significant was taking place, but it wasn't loud or spectacular. The band started playing a soft tune that was appropriate for leisurely dancing and enduring memories. Laughter erupted from pockets, plates clinked, and a kind of forgiving haze was cast over the room by the warm glow of string lights. My brother was the first to notice us. His eyes grew wide. Then he grinned broadly, relieved and appreciative, as if 10 years of stress had been lifted off his shoulders. His new wife gasped gently as he poked her, then put a touch to her heart. The attention made my father tense, but he stayed put. I said, leaning in close, "Just breathe." He let out his breath through his nose like he often did before confronting an unfamiliar situation. We walked over to the cake table where the bride and groom were standing with their families. Dotted with exquisite sugar flowers, the towering 3-tier cake shone in the sunlight. The father of the groom gave us a cordial welcome. "You made it just in time." My father attempted a smile. It looked rusty but real. The bride came over to me grinning broadly. She baited, "Ready for photos?" "FO," I repeated, arching an eyebrow. "Yes," she chuckled. "Your family?" Something about the term struck me surprisingly hard. Before I could answer, there was a disturbance near the entrance, followed by the thud of boots and low whispers. I turned just in time to see a small group of men enter the hall. They were clothed in civilian suits, but they had a distinct demeanor. I gasped. 2 sailors from my first command, 3 former SEALs, and a Marine whose life I had previously saved. They weren't meant to be here. They had not received an invitation. However, they would still arrive, drawn in some way by mutual respect and the unseen bond of service that unites those who have shared a fire. Senior Chief Torres, who was the tallest, moved forward, hobbling a little due to the metal rod in his leg. With a voice full of pride he said, "Admiral." Authorization to participate in the festivities. I was usually grinning. As they got closer, the crowd fell silent, not out of fear or spectacle, but rather because something sacred had entered the room, something that those who have never served can sense but cannot identify. Torres extracted a tiny velvet packet from his pocket. Beside me, my father stiffened. When Torres opened it, he took out a challenge coin that I recognized right away. It was tarnished, gold-edged, and had an insignia from a clandestine rescue operation. 2 decent men were lost during that operation. Torres almost died during the procedure. Leadership means bleeding first in this operation. He gave me the coin. He said, "You carried us." My throat was filled with intense, unexpected, and overpowering emotions. The coin's weight was familiar, yet it felt heavier than before as I curled my fingers around it. With his jaw hanging open, my father observed the discussion. He had never before truly understood the seriousness of the world I lived in. After a moment of silent attention, the SEALs moved aside to become part of the throng. Some wiped tears as they gazed, while others were just startled. In a whisper, my brother said, "You're incredible." I gave a headshake. "I'm not. I simply performed my duties." "Your job saved people," he said. Before I could respond, I saw my father move next to me, straightening his shoulders and changing his posture. He began to breathe more slowly. He was getting ready to say something. My father moved forward when the groom's father asked for a moment of silence. The whole fell silent, the kind of silence that precedes a toast or a reckoning. Everyone could feel the weight of my father's prolonged gaze on me. Then he spoke in a steady but shaky voice. "My daughter was misjudged by me." There were a few muted gasps. "This time," he said more loudly, "strength, in my opinion, only looked one way. It turned out to be her." My heart pounded. Pushing her away, I told myself, made her more resilient. His voice broke. It was discipline to be silent. There was safety in that distance. However, I was mistaken. He took a deep breath. When I could hardly stand for her, she stood for this nation. The crowd shuddered. With tears in his eyes yet unbroken, my father turned to face me. "And I apologize for not seeing you every year," he continued. "Every time I said anything inappropriate, you deserved a father, but instead you received criticism. The band ceased to perform. Mid-step, the servers froze. Even the kids became quiet as they realized how serious the situation was. My father then straightened his back and gave a slow, deliberate salute. Not flawless, not a sharp military salute, but sincere, and human. The breath in the room was held. For a little moment, I remained motionless, allowing decades of pain, silence, rage, and want to transform into something fresh. Then I returned the salute. Warm, surprised, and passionate applause erupted around us. A beginning, a blessing, a release. Shakily, my father lowered his arm breath. He said, "Can we try again?" "Yes," I said. "We can." He let out a sigh of relief. Unvarnished, exposed relief. He strolled beside me without flinching for the first time in years as we re-entered the crowd. The remainder of the evening went by in gentle waves, filled with stories, dancing, laughter, and pictures. Uncomfortable yet present, my father even sat with my brother and his new bride. The seals stayed for cake and made courteous toasts and jokes. I experienced a feeling that I hadn't experienced with my family in a very long time in every room and nook. Feeling like you belong. The bride squeezed my hands as the evening came to an end. She whispered, "Thank you for coming. This day's entire vibe was altered by you." "Love did too," I said. Her eyes shimmered as she grinned. My father tentatively put a hand on my shoulder as the lights went down and the guests departed. He said, "I'm proud of you." I said, "I know." It didn't feel too late for the first time. If this tale resonated with you, pause to consider the people you've drifted away from and those that supported you throughout difficult times. For more tales of resiliency, honesty, and healing, share your story below or subscribe. We get up by supporting one another.